All right. 16.2, page 225. The crucifixion of Jesus. The account of the crucifixion as given in the Acts of Pilate is undoubtedly the nearest historical of any religious writings of the 2nd century, as everything connected with this event is of absorbing interest. The subject cannot be approached with indifference. Bishop Ellicott, in an able essay on the Apocryphal Gospels published in the Cambridge Essays for 1856, admits that this account was used by the earlier fathers. To show the value of this testimony, we will quote from his prefatory remarks the contemptuous language which he employs when speaking of the Apocryphal Gospels as a class. Their real demerits, their mediocities, their absurdities, their coarsenesses, the barbaries of their style, and the inconsequence of their narrative have never been excused or condoned. It would be hard to find any competent writer in any age of the church who has been beguiled into saying anything civil or commendatory. And yet the writer, who could not refrain from expressing himself thus strongly towards these unfortunate bantling gospels when he comes to consider the Acts of Pilate, feels compelled to speak in a more respectful manner. In commencing, he says, "We pass onward to a very important document, apparently of a very early date, the first part of the Gospel of Nicodemus, or as it is commonly called, the Acta Pilati. The question of real interest is this: whether the present Acta Pilati are substantially the same with the very ancient document referred to with such respect by Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and other early and reputable writers. It need scarcely be said that these ancient acts are not the real judiciary acts of Pilate. The Acta noticed by Tertullian was probably an account of our Savior's condemnation, written by some early Jewish Christian, and derived from eyewitnesses, or from important oral traditions which, in so short a time and on such an event, could not have become seriously erroneous. After stating that it would be liable to changes and interpolations, and that there is reason to think the apocryphal Acts of Pilate was one of the interpolated manuscripts, he says, when, however, it is remembered that the quotations made by Tertullian and others from the ancient Acta are all found in the present Acta, it seems fair to conclude, especially from the nature and length of the composition, that these changes or interpolations have not been very serious, and that we have in this first part of the Gospel of Nicodemus substantially the very ancient and important Acta Pilati of the 2nd century. Again, if we strip off the obviously fabulous, it does not seem that the writer has related some portions of the trial in a manner so very probable and plausible that we may well pause before we sweep away the whole as a mere party fiction. There is something very natural in the way in which the Jews heap up indiscriminate accusation. There is an eager ferocity of their part, met by a steady and almost indignant scorn on the part of the government. It seems, at any rate, very happily depicted. The desire of the Jews not only that Christ should die, but that he should be crucified, that he should die the death of a malefactor, is brought out very distinctly. There are minor incidents, the weeping populace, the appearance of witnesses in favor of the accused, though here there is evidently much interpolated, the steady defense of Nicodemus, the persecution of the pious Joseph, the cloth wound around the crucified Savior, the crown of thorns still retained on the brow, the account given by the centurion to Pilate, and the distress of the unjust man and his wife, which all tend to make us regard these interpolated but still very ancient records with a greater interest than we can feel for any other member of the apocryphal family. After so respectable a testimony for this gospel from one who cannot be accused of any prejudice in its favor, we proceed to contrast its narrative of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus with the parallel accounts in the canonical gospels. The proposal to release a prisoner. This account is given in all 4 of the canonical Gospels. The narrative is, however, so divergent that it can scarcely be considered parallel except in Mark and Matthew. Of these, the comparison will be made with the shorter form. Acts of Pilate, chapter 9. Pilate, again calling the multitude, said to them, Since there is a custom among you on the day of Passover that I should release to you one that is bound, I have noted a murderer called Barbaras, also Jesus, who is called Christ, in whom I find no cause of death. Which therefore of these two do you wish to have released? They all cried out, saying, Release unto us Barabbas. Pilate saith unto them, What shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? They all said unto him, Let him be crucified. Matthew 27:15-23. Now at that feast the governor was wont to release unto the people a prisoner whom they would, and they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they gathered together, Pilate said unto them, Whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. Omitted parallel in another part of the Acts of Pilate. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said unto them, Whether of the twain will ye that I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate saith unto them, What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ? They all said unto him, Let him be crucified. And the governor said, Why, what evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified. Hold on. The foregoing accounts are closely parallel, but the canonical Gospels exhibit considerable accretion. There is some amplification of language and the introduction of the dream of the wife of Pilate. Pilate washing his hands of the blood of Jesus. Acts of Pilate, chapter 9. Then Pilate, taking water, washed his hands before the people, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person, see ye to it. The Jews answered, saying, His blood be upon us and upon our children. Matthew chapter 27. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, His blood be on us and on our children. Not in either of the other Gospels. In the Acts of Pilate, Jesus is now sentenced as follows. Then Pilate commanded Jesus to be brought before him and spake to him the following words. Thy own nation hath charged thee as making thyself a king. Wherefore I, Herod, sentence thee to be whipped according to the laws of former governors, and that thou be first bound, then hanged upon a cross in that place where thou art now a prisoner, and also 2 criminals with thee, whose names are Demas and Gestas. Jesus taken to execution. As the account is less connected in the canonical Gospels, we shall be obliged here, in order to preserve the parallel, to put several passages together. Excuse me. Acts of Pilate, chapter 10. And Jesus went out of the hall, and the 2 thieves with him. And when they were come to the place which is called Golgotha, they stripped him of his raiment, and girt him about with a linen cloth, and put a crown of thorns upon his head, and put a reed in his hand. Matthew 27. And he delivered him to be crucified. When they were come unto a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of a skull, they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe, and when they had plaited a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. Praying for his enemies. Acts of Pilate, chapter 10. But Jesus said, My Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Luke 23:34. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. His garments are divided. Acts of Pilate, chapter 10. And they divided his garments, and upon his vesture they cast lots. Mark 15:24. And when they had crucified him, they parted his garments, casting lots upon them, what every man should take. think that continues. Yeah, and parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. Luke 23:34. And they parted his remnant and cast lots. I think that all goes, his garments divided. 24, 27. I'll put them together. The law of a Christian is well as illustrated here by comparing the short statements in Luke and the Acts of Pilate on the one hand with Mark and Matthew on the other. Luke being a compilation, this portion of it is probably from a manuscript older even than the Acts of Pilate. In John, the account is extended with the additional statement that the garments were divided into 4 parts to every soldier a part, and that lots were cast for the coat, which was without seam. Mocked by the chief priests and soldiers. Hold on. Okay. Acts of Pilate, chapter 10. The people in the meantime stood by, and the chief priests and elders of the Jews mocked him, saying, He saved others, let him now save himself if he can. If he be the Son of God, let him now come down from the cross. The soldiers also mocked him, and taking vinegar and gall, offered it to him to drink, and said to him, If thou art king of the Jews, deliver thyself. Mark 15:29-32 and 36. And they that passed by railed on him, wagging their heads and saying, Ah, thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself and come down from the cross. Likewise also the chief priests mocking said among themselves with the scribes, He saved others, himself he cannot save. Let Christ the King of Israel descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe. And one ran and filled a sponge full of vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. Jesus pierced in the side. Acts of Pilate, chapter 10. Longinus, a soldier taking a spear, pierced his side, and directly there came forth blood and water. John 19:34. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith there came out blood and water. The title upon the cross. Acts of Pilate, chapter 10. And Pilate wrote a title upon the cross in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek letters, to wit, This is the King of the Jews. John 19:19 and 20. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh to the city, and it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. In the Synoptic Gospels, it is not stated who wrote the title. In Luke, it is, This is the King of the Jews. In Mark, the King of the Jews. In Matthew, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. In Luke, it is stated to have been in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. All right, the thieves on the cross. Acts of Pilate, chapter 10. But one of the 2 thieves who was crucified with Jesus, whose name was Gestas, said to Jesus, If thou art the Christ, deliver thyself and us. But the thief who was crucified on the right hand, whose name was Demas, answering, rebuked him and said, Dost not thou who art condemned to this punishment fear God? We indeed justly and rightly, according to what we have done, receive our reward. But this Jesus, what evil hath he done? After this, groaning, he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. Jesus answering said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. Luke 23:39-43. And one of the malefactors who were hanged railed on him, saying, If thou be Christ, save thyself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, Dost thou not fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. The account in the compilation of Luke is the shortest and indicates a manuscript of greater antiquity than the Acts of Pilate. This accretion is in the latter gospel, which gives in additional circumstances the names of the thieves, the crucifixion of Demas on the right hand, and Gestas on the left hand of Jesus, and the groaning of Demas before making his dying request. In Mark and Matthew, both of the thieves revile Jesus. Attention might here be called to the fact that while there are older manuscripts concerning the crucifixion, etc., which found their way into the Gospel of Luke, the case is different with the miracles. The shortest, and as there is no reason to believe the earliest accounts of these, are in the Acts of Pilate. The darkness at the crucifixion. Acts of Pilate, chapter 11. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole earth until the 9th hour, and while the sun was eclipsed, etc. Luke 23, 44, and 45. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour, and the sun was darkened, etc. In Mark and Matthew, it is stated, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. Reading of the veil of the temple, Acts of Pilate, chapter 11. Behold, the veil of the temple was rent from the top to the bottom, and the rocks also were rent, Matthew 27:51. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. In Matthew, there is the work of a latter hand, which interpolated the earthquake. In Luke and Mark, there is only the rending of the veil. Rising of the saints, Acts of Pilate, chapter 11. And the graves opened, and many bodies of saints who slept arose. Matthew 27:52, 53. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. No such account in any of the other Gospels. The interpolation by the author of Matthew of the Acts of Pilate or of some common manuscript is manifest. The whole of the 53rd verse is accretion, and by a strange anachronism, though the author of Matthew has the graves opened by the earthquake at the time of the crucifixion, and manifestly intends to represent their inhabitants as coming forth in consequence of that event, they do not arise until several days afterward. Michael Ellis, Farrar, Dean Millam, and others attribute this scene to the excited imaginations of some of the disciples. The dying words and death of Jesus. Acts of Pilate, chapter 11. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Heli, Heli, lama sabachthani, which interpreted is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And after these things, Jesus said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said this, he gave up the ghost. Mark 15:34. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is, being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Luke 23:46. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, unto thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Scenes at the cross afterwards. Acts of Pilate, chapter 11. The centurion, when he saw the Jesus crying out, thus gave up the ghost, glorified God, and said, Of a truth, this was a just man. And all the people who stood by were accordingly troubled at the sight, and reflecting upon what had passed, smote upon their breasts and returned to the city of Jerusalem. Luke 23:47 and 48. Now, when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was a righteous man. And all the people that came together to that sight, beholding the things which were done, smote their breasts and returned. In one of the canonical Gospels, the centurion is made to say, Truly this was the Son of God. And in another, Truly this man was the Son of God. The women at the crucifixion. Acts of Pilate, hold on. Double check. Okay. Acts of Pilate, chapter 11. But all his acquaintances stood at a distance, and also the women who had followed him from Galilee, beholding these things. Luke 23:49. And all his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood afar off, beholding these things. Joseph of Arimathea. Acts of Pilate, chapter 11. And behold, a certain man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, came to the governor and entreated the governor that he would permit him to take the body of Jesus from the cross, and the governor permitted it. John 19:38. And after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, besought Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him leave. Longer accounts in Luke and Mark. Okay, the burial of Jesus. Acts of Pilate, chapter 11. And Nicodemus came, bringing with him a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100-pound weight. And with tears they took down Jesus from the cross, and bound him in linen clothes and spices, according to the custom of burying among the Jews, and placed him in a new tomb which Joseph had built and caused to be cut out of a rock, in which no man had yet been placed. And they rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre. John 19:39-41. And there came also Nicodemus, who at the first came to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. Then took they the body of Jesus, and wound it in linen clothes, with the spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre, wherein was never man yet laid. There laid thy Jesus, therefore, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. Matthew 27:60. And he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed. The resurrection of Jesus. Acts of Pilate, chapter 13. And while they, the priests and the rulers of the Jews, assembled, were all wondering at the miraculous escape of Joseph, behold, one of the soldiers who were guarding the sepulchre of Jesus spake in the synagogue and said, While we were guarding the sepulchre of Jesus, there was an earthquake, and we saw an angel of God who rolled away the stone from the sepulchre and sat upon it, and his countenance was like lightning, and his garment like snow, and we became through fear as dead persons. And we heard the angel saying to the woman at the sepulchre of Jesus, Fear not, I know that ye seek the crucified Jesus. He has risen as he foretold. Come and behold the place where he was laid. And go quickly and say to his disciples, He has risen from the dead, and will go before you into Galilee. There ye shall see him as he told you. Matthew 28:1-7. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door, and sat upon it. His countenance was like lightning, and his raiment white as snow. And for fear of him the keepers did shake, and became as dead men. And the angel answered and said unto the woman, Fear not ye, for I know that ye seek Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay. And go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And behold, he goeth before you into Galilee. There shall ye see him. Lo, I have told you. Bribing the soldiers. Acts of Pilate, chapter 13. The Jews, hearing this, were afraid, and said among themselves, If by any means these things become public, everybody will believe in Jesus. Then, gathering a large sum of money, they gave it to the soldiers, saying, Tell the people that while ye were sleeping, the disciples of Jesus came by night and stole the body of Jesus. And if this should come to the ears of Pilate the governor, we will satisfy him and secure you. The soldiers accordingly, receiving the money, said as they were instructed by the Jews, and their report was spread abroad among all the people. Matthew 28, 11 to 15. Now, when they were going, behold, some of the watch came into the city and showed unto the chief priests all the things that were done. And when they were assembled with the elders and had taken counsel, they gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, Say ye, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. And if this come to the governor's ears, we will persuade him and secure you. So they took the money and did as they were taught, and this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day. The account in Matthew, which is most nearly parallel with the Acts of Pilate, differs from it in one very important feature. The Acts of Pilate, the resurrection is only stated upon the report of the soldiers. In Matthew, it is related as a distinct narrative on the authority of the historian himself, while the report of the soldiers is brought in afterwards as confirmatory testimony. But in the bribing of the soldiers for the purpose of keeping the resurrection a secret, the narratives again run together. The closing sentence in the Acts of Pilate is, and their report was spread abroad among all the people. In Matthew it reads, and this saying is common among the Jews until this day. The language of Matthew appears to be that of the letter document. The Ascension of Jesus, Acts of Pilate, and Appendix to Mark. It is generally agreed that the last 12 verses of the Gospel of Mark are an interpolation, a sort of appendix to the Gospel, added by some transcriber. There is the following parallel between the Acts of Pilate and a portion of this appendix. Acts of Pilate, chapter 14. But a certain priest named Phineas, Ada, a schoolmaster, and a Levite named Aegeus, they three came from Galilee to Jerusalem and told the chief priests and all who were in the synagogue, saying, We have seen Jesus, whom you crucified, talking with his 11 disciples and sitting in the midst of them on Mount Olivet, and saying to them, Go ye into the world, preach to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and he who shall believe and be baptized will be saved. And when he had said these things to his disciples, we saw him ascending into heaven. Mark chapter 16. Afterwards he appeared unto the 11 as they sat at meat, and upbraided them with their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they believed not them who had seen him after he was risen. And he said unto them, Go ye into all the world, and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. And these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name they shall cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents. And if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. And then, after the Lord had spoken unto them, he was received up into heaven, and sat on the right hand of God. This parallel would indicate that the Acts of Pilate was antecedent to the Gospels, since if it were subsequent, this portion of Acts could not be accounted for, it not being the original of Gospel of Mark. The Acts of Pilate, the narrative is continued in the following manner. The chief priests, being alarmed at the news of the resurrection of Jesus and his appearance to the Galileans, gave them money and sent them back. The Jews then assembled for consultation, and Annas and Caiaphas comforted them, saying, Why should we believe the soldiers who guarded the sepulchre of Jesus, telling us that an angel rolled away the stone from the door of the sepulchre? Perhaps his own disciples told them this and gave them money, that they should declare these things, and that they, the disciples, might bear away the body of Jesus. Besides, consider this, that there is no credit to be given to the foreigners, because they also took a large sum from us, and have declared to all according to the instructions we gave them. They have to maintain faith either to us or to the disciples of Jesus. The foregoing are all the parallels between the Acts of Pilate, and the canonical Gospels. It is impossible not to perceive that the narrative in the Acts of Pilate is more natural and consistent and better sustained throughout. In Luke, there is a preliminary trial before Herod, who has Jesus arrayed in a gorgeous robe and sent back to Pilate. Then, after the trial, he is taken to execution, addressing the women by the way. After the mocking and deriding, the dividing of the remnant, etc., and the inscription on the cross, the historian gives the prayer of Jesus for his enemies. Then the scene between the two thieves on the cross and between one of them and Jesus. It is stated that the sun was darkened at the crucifixion. After describing the other scenes in a manner somewhat similar to the other synoptics, the author of this gospel states that on the first day of the week, early in the morning, the women who came with him from Galilee came to the sepulchre, bringing spices, etc., for the purpose of embalming the body of Jesus. They found the stone rolled away and the sepulchre empty. They then saw two men clothed in shining garments who told them Jesus had risen and reminded them of his words that he should rise the third day. Then Peter went and saw the grave empty. Jesus afterward appeared to the two disciples on their way to Emmaus, and to the 11 apostles at Jerusalem. Then, leading them to Bethany, he blessed them and ascended into heaven. In Mark, Jesus is delivered to Pilate directly by the chief priests, who, after holding a consultation with the elders and scribes and with the council, had apprehended and bound Jesus, nothing being said about the examination before Herod. Then follows the trial or examination before Pilate, the clamor of the Jews, the show of the resistance and final yielding by Pilate, scenes on the way to the crucifixion and at the cross differing from Luke in various details, with which the reader is familiar. Then, after the death and burial of Jesus, when the Sabbath was past, 3 women whose names are mentioned went with spices to anoint him. They found the stone rolled away, and entering into the sepulchre, they saw a young man sitting clothed in a long white garment. He told them Jesus had gone to Galilee. Jesus then appeared first to Mary Magdalene, after that to the 2 disciples, then to the 11 as they sat at meat. Then follows the remainder of the spurious appendix. In Matthew, the author relates nearly all the incidents given in Luke and Mark concerning the crucifixion and several of his own besides. He has 2 earthquakes and many other incidents unknown to the other synoptics. After the death and burial, the 2 Marys came to the sepulchre. There they saw one who is now represented as the angel who had rolled away the stone from the sepulchre. He stated also that Jesus had gone into Galilee. Jesus appeared to the women as they were returning. He then appeared to the 11 on a mountain in Galilee. The narrative in John differs still in many particulars from all 3 of the synoptics, not only omitting many incidents, but adding important additional matter not always consistent with the other accounts. Among such might be mentioned much that Jesus said to Pilate, saying of Jesus on the cross, etc., the piercing of his side, the scene with Thomas after the resurrection, the appearance of Jesus after that event to the fishermen on the Sea of Tiberias, and the miraculous draught of fishes, which are manifestly confounded with scenes in Christ's ministry. If we turn to the narrative of all these events as found in the Acts of Pilate, while there is sufficient that is marvelous, there will be found nevertheless a degree of unity and consistency which is wanting in the other Gospels. In the first place, there is the trial before Pilate, and in the language of Bishop Eliot, the Jews heaping up indiscriminate accusation and eager ferocity on their part met, at first, by a steady and almost indignant scorn on the part of the governor. At the same time, the weeping populace, the appearance of witnesses in favor of the accused. These witnesses testified to many miracles Jesus had wrought, hoping thereby to save his life. All this having failed, Pilate, overborne by the Jews, passes sentence on Jesus, something quite natural in a judicial proceeding, but which is entirely omitted in the other Gospels, except that in Luke it is stated that Pilate gave sentence that it should be as the Jews required. Then Jesus is taken to execution. The scenes at the cross are stated briefly and in natural order. Coming to the resurrection, we find it related on the report of the soldiers. The appearance of Jesus was to the Galileans and to Joseph of Arimathea. When considered in reference to the length of the accounts, it will be found that the narratives in the Acts of Pilate are generally, though not invariably, shorter than those in the canonical Gospels. Upon the whole, we may reasonably conclude that the older Gospel, those of the first century, contain fragmentary accounts of the crucifixion, that these were first put together in a connected form in the Acts of Pilate, to which there was added, for the first time, the material resurrection. This event, at first stated at second hand as coming from the soldiers, was afterwards incorporated into the canonical Gospels as a part of the principal narrative.